on the board of NMBio, and I'm Sue Prelosny. Known Stu almost since I've moved here, so it's like 5 years, Stu. So Dr. Rose is an active entrepreneur and investor emphasizing pharma, biotech, and medical devices with interest in any for-profit startup that solves problems. Dr. Rose starts companies and invests in very early stage companies with the potential to address the way the world will be in the future. He particularly likes companies that have disruptive technology or business models. Most of his career was spent as senior manufacturing and business executive in the global pharmaceutical industry. He's lived and worked in places as disparate as Puerto Rico and Russia. He's had 4 joint ventures in China and worked exclusively throughout Asia, including India and Australia. Some of the startups for which he's currently involved are Tofighi, Go Station, Empower Technology, Wildlife Protection Management, and Fat Pipe, New Mexico, which is a network of collaborating and co-working spaces. Dr. Rose is a venture partner in Tramway Ventures. You'll hear more about them today here in New Mexico. He founded and operates the Bioscience Center, and that's an incubator space for bioscience startups. He also serves on the board of directors of the New Mexico Community Capital Organization, and it's focused on helping Native American entrepreneurs. I give you our moderator, Dr. Rose. Thanks, Stu.
Thank you, Sue. So I look around this room since I've been here since early this morning, and I've seen, probably in and out over 100 people. If we had done this back in 2012 or 13, I'm not sure whether there would have been more than 3. If we had done it 5 years ago, maybe 10. And what that tells you, or tells me anyway, is that we have an environment in the biosciences that in New Mexico is exploding. The reality is that it's been here a long time. But what changed is that if you go back to the 2012, 13, 14 period, and you had a startup in biotechnology, if you needed to raise capital, pretty much the only source were angel investors who would put in $20,000, $25,000 at most. And often it was only $5,000 or $10,000. So you as a startup could maybe raise perfect world, $150,000, which didn't get you very far. And the companies that started back then tended to leave because that was the only way they could get capital. That's changed dramatically over the last 10 years. And a big reason why it has changed is that the state started paying attention to funding of startups, not only in the biosciences, but in general. And in particular, the revolution was when the state began the Catalyst Fund, which provided about $20 million for early stage startups investing through small micro venture capital firms. And here today we can have everybody talking about how that evolved. But that has led to this massive number of bioscience startups around the state. And it's not only human bioscience, it's agricultural bioscience as well. So we are extremely well positioned technically. And the challenge for us in the future is to continue to find support for these early stage companies, now that the Catalyst Fund has exhausted its monies, along with how do we fund the companies that have been successful and have evolved to the point where they now need to start raising monies with more zeros at the end. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm first going to ask each of our speakers to introduce themselves, and then they'll each give a little bit about their perspective on how this is evolving. So I'm told, Ryan, you have to go first because you're going to leave.
Well, good afternoon. I'm so glad to be here, Greg. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, our executive director of the Bioscience Authority is ill today, And so I'm sitting in for her, but I think we're introducing and then we're going to jump into it.
Just introduce yourself
Okay,
first.
so
And then
I'm
we'll-
Ryan Cangelos. I'm the Director of Economic and Community Development at the Health Sciences Center and also a part of the Bioscience Authority as the strategy director.
I'm Dave Blivin. I'm the founder and managing director of Cottonwood Technology Funds. Based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We focus on the region generally, so New Mexico and the surrounding states. We also have an office in Europe, in the Netherlands, and surround on or focus on Northwest Europe. We closed the third fund early last year. We have about 150 million under management in total. And we invest really across all industries, all technologies, all hard science. So we don't do soft tech, if you will. We typically invest really at the founding stage, seed, pre-seed. We're often helping fund the first prototype or demonstration of the technology. And we have made investments in the biosciences space, mostly in New Mexico, actually. So with that, I'll hand it over to Harold.
My name's Harold Lavender. Let's see, my role here today, I'm kind of the outlier here because I'm not a bio or a farmer or any of those areas. I am a member of the State Investment Council. I have been a member since 2011. Happily, Stu brought up the Catalyst Fund, and that was one of our ideas a long time ago. It's amazing how that has progressed. But that's a tiny amount of money compared to what's available, and which I'll talk about during my talk. I sit on several other boards. I'm chairman of the investment committee of the SIC, and I can fill you in on a little bit more stuff when it's my turn. Waneta.
Thank you. My name is Waneta Tuttle. My claim to fame is that I've known Harold since we were in the 8th grade or something like that. I don't know. But we are both native New Mexicans and happy and excited to be here. I'm the managing partner at Tramway Ventures. We're now investing out of our fund too. And we invest in life sciences and healthcare.
Okay, great. So the topic we're supposed to be talking about now is what's coming. Okay, and we're gonna want to talk about the future sources of monies that we see coming, and then at the end of that, I'll come back and ask some more questions about related matters. But Ryan, why don't you go and talk about what the Bioscience Authority is doing?
Great, thank you, Stu. So first and foremost, when the Bioscience Authority was established legislatively in 2017, one of its main functions in the legislation is providing funding to start up and existing bioscience companies in New Mexico. In 2016, a bunch of us got together and worked through looking at all of the different sectors in New Mexico and trying to figure out how to diversify our economy. And we've discovered that biosciences is one of the greatest assets that we have in our state with what's coming out of our labs, what's coming out of UNM Health Sciences and our main campus, New Mexico Tech, NMSU. And so we started working towards getting it established as a state entity. The Bioscience Authority is the first public-private partnership of its kind that the state put into legislation and passed and the governor signed. And it's also a 501c3. And so we're able to take state funding, whether a general appropriation from the legislature, monies from other entities that the state has, and use that to co-invest in bioscience companies. And so we just had a really awesome thing that we're celebrating just recently. We partnered with the New Mexico Angels and their vintage fund, and we invested in NMBio. A lot of you guys know about that company, that the technology came out of UNM. And so we did a co-investment project with them where we invested $75,000. They invested $150,000 to give them $225,000 of funding right when they needed it. And so what we're trying to do now, and we have support of many legislators, and Senator George Munoz is going to sponsor the legislation to help us try to establish a co-investment fund. We're shooting high, $50 million. We know that the state has a ton of money right now. I think last legislative meeting that they had, Senator Munoz said that they have $3.5 billion extra dollars. Harold knows more about all of that. And so 50 million is small in that regard, but we would take any amount of money that we can use in this program. And one of our board members, Paul Lair, is here with us. And I have to say that Ken is here and Dr. Rose. They started the beginning foundations of us having this program. And so they get to celebrate with us this first investment. And of course, Greg is on our board. We have a great board of directors that are all totally in line with each other to figure out how to bolster biosciences in New Mexico. And so we'll be up at the legislature really working hard trying to get this co-investment fund. And the cool thing about this fund is that we're not, as the Bioscience Authority, saying that we're the experts in investing into bioscience companies, but we partner with those who are. And so here at this table, Waneta Tuttle and my colleague here is totally professionals in doing so. And so what we want to do is partner with them, use their knowledge, use their expertise, and use the monies that we have to bolster the money that they would invest in bioscience companies.
Okay, Dave?
First, I want to thank, since Waneta and I are investors in NMBio, thank you for the support you recently provided. Yeah, on the funding side, I don't know, it's a mixed bag in my view. You do have obviously Waneta's fund. I think it's the only fund in New Mexico focused on life science, right? So, you know, when you talk about a co-investment fund, there's a limited number of funds that you can co-invest with currently in the state. And the Catalyst Fund, I think, was a great addition to the state, but most of those funds, there was no, I don't want to say this in a negative way, but there was no real plan to support those funds raising a second fund. So most of those funds are fully invested. They don't really have a clear pathway to a second fund. And I think that's something that could be a focus of the state, is trying to help many of those funds that I think did a good job have a pathway to raising their next funds, because all those funds were at least 50% supported by the state. To the extent that there's no state support for a second fund, it makes it very difficult for those funds to raise a second fund. Even if they get the same investors committed to participating, they end up with a fund half the size. Raising a second fund, I can tell you from experience, is probably the hardest fund you can ever raise. The first fund actually is not that hard relative to the second fund. First fund, people believe in the vision and the person is running it. The second fund, you're generally going back to the same investors. They haven't received any money back yet, so you're asking them to double their commitment essentially to your cause, if you will. And so it's hard to recruit new investors in because you don't have results yet generally, because it's still early. And it's even hard to get your current investors in because, again, they're having to double their commitment to the fund. But certainly if the state was in a position to help support a commitment to those second funds, it makes it easier for those funds to sort of stay in the market. So I think you're going to see relatively, I think you're going to see a drop off in activity without the catalyst funds in the market, because there's no natural funds to fill that void. And even with the co-investment fund, again, you have to have funds that you can follow, right? Yeah. So, and so you're looking at 2 out of 2 probably of the prospects, which is not good for the state. And you can always support funds that are from out of state that are life science focused. And I think that's the real advantage of having a co-investment fund, is they can be agnostic in where the money might come from. And they can actually, and I think you probably envision this, recruit life science focused funds to get more educated on what's here in New Mexico and be a natural partner for them. So I think it's a plus, but certainly we're not out of the woods.
I'm going to skip Harold and go to Waneta for the next comment.
Yeah, and just to follow on Dave's comment about, the SCIC's programs invested in a number of funds in their bigger program, in their regional program, that have a requirement to invest or cost to be invested in the amount of money. But getting those funds to actually look at and pay attention to deals in New Mexico, this co-investment fund could really play a big role there, because we need more funds in life sciences and we need bigger funds. These kinds of companies that we invest in, we avoid typically anything requiring a PMA, meaning pharma generally, and because of the amount of capital that's required. But even at the medical device level, the biotech tools level, and the healthcare AI level, these companies require lots of capital. They can't be bootstrapped, or else they wouldn't be seeking venture investment from us. So I guess my plea is I think we've come a long, long way. I've been doing not venture investing, but entrepreneurial work for a long, long time. And it's light years different now, but we really need to keep the momentum. And there are a lot of new programs. Interested to see what's going to happen with the New Mexico Venture Capital Fund. That was approved in last year's session. And I think they're still in the planning phase. Interested to see how that works. But we certainly have plenty of opportunity. We need more funds in the life sciences, and we need bigger funds.
Okay, now I'm going to ask Harold to talk about the SIC, State Investment Council perspective, and give us a briefing on what you can tell us about America's Frontier Fund.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do, if it's okay, Stu, is talk a little bit about maybe address David's concerns and Waneta's to a certain extent, and talk a little bit about what I consider to be, and I said this recently, the potential golden age of venture investing in New Mexico. There are 4, instead of the Catalyst Fund being one little fund. When I say little, I grew up in Raton, so that was a $20 million fund, and that's a lot of money in Raton. But in the big picture of what we're trying to deal with here, that's not a lot of money. There are 4 new opportunities, three new ones, and one that's been that's actually going to act as if it's new that I'd like to cover. I'll start with the SIC. I've been on the SIC since 2011, and I've been chairman of the investment committee for the last 6 years. And I think everyone here probably either reads in the paper or sees the news that we've grown the fund from 13 billion to 41 billion since 2013, and that's had a huge impact on the bottom line of the state of New Mexico. The council has been, in light of the America's Frontier Fund, which I'll talk about in a second, the council has evidenced a it has become much more willing to invest in venture because the council recognizes that we need to grow our own. We need to put the money at work in New Mexico. We need to help New Mexico entrepreneurs grow and then thrive. And to address David's primary concern, I'm hopeful that what we're talking about now can do that. Let's talk about the Frontier Fund for a moment. I can only give you the bare essentials, which were in the paper and which you can see by going online on the SIC website. It's $100 million, but that's over 10 years. So it's not a huge amount of money up front. I can't give a lot of details, although I do know a couple of pieces. The initial money that will be drawn from the SIC, the investment from the SIC, will go to set up 2 different parts of this fund. One will be they'd like to talk about it being tech transfer on steroids. And the idea is, the reason they're here, the reason they chose New Mexico as their center, there's going to be 7 more satellite centers in smaller markets. If you look at New Mexico, it's kind of in a band like that, not like that. We're not California, not New York, but in the middle more. And the idea is that the first thing they'll do is to establish a venture studio. And that turns out to be that they will use that to attempt to grow and build the tech transfer situation in New Mexico. They came here because there are more than 10,000 unused and undeveloped patents on the books in New Mexico right now. LATL, Sandia, UNM, Tech, AFRL, primarily those 5. There are, if you can imagine that, 10,000 potential in growth, and that's why they came here. because they saw those numbers and said, wait a minute, if there's a fertile ground for that kind of development, this is it. So that's what we heard when we heard the SIC. And so roughly half of each year of that 100 million, roughly, so you can think 10 million, but it's not a lot of 10 million. It'll be what they need, like to get their infrastructure going and things of that nature. And that half of that will go to the tech transfer project, and half will go to a traditional venture capital fund. So this is another fund that will be available for entrepreneurs and for companies to address. This fund will, my understanding, I didn't say out of the box. Anything I say, anything that's an opinion is mine only. And anything about the SIC, I for sure am not, that will be an opinion. I'll give you the facts as I know them. I am not speaking for the SIC. I'm one of 11 votes. It takes 6 votes to pass something. I'm more than happy to share my perspective, not saying a word about the other 10 members, okay? So if you, whatever I say, please take it with a little bit of grain of salt, because I can be wrong. Not very often. No, I could be wrong. I think that the venture capital side of this will require, and I'm not sure how the tech transfer part will know. TJ knows, TJ Cook, one of my compatriots in the back of the room, was the fund manager of the CNM Ingenuity Venture Fund. He probably knows better than I do. But I think that these funds are going to be available, and they're going to be able to be used on a one-to-one match. And so that means that if it's 5 million and 5 million, for example, the first year, then that's 10 and 10, or it's 5 and 10 for sure. As far as the studio goes, I don't know what the rules are going to be with that. But the venture side will be, for example, a $10 million fund. They are planning to have a fund of funds, again, not make direct investments. That's been tried in New Mexico several times, and it's never worked. Every dollar that was invested by the into direct investing, by regardless of the organization, has lost money except for the co-investment fund with Sun Mountain Capital and the SIC. That's the only one that's really had any success. So funded funds is the way to go. We have a fund here that's a fund of funds, and a fund here that's a fund of funds, and I'm not quite sure what Brian's situation is going to be, but hopefully it'll be like that. Okay, so that's the America's Frontier Fund. Lots and lots of details will be ferreted out in the next 6 to 8 weeks. There will be sensational adequate publicity, so each of you will have an opportunity to know exactly what's going to happen, how you can apply, and how you can become involved. So that there aren't going to be any secrets. Everything we do is out in the open. Everything we do is public. And in that regard, once they get their infrastructure in place, I know they plan the same thing. I hope I don't dominate too much, but I'll keep going a little bit longer. The second part is the fact that the SIC and the investment and the SIC, the fact that the SIC was willing to invest $100 million in venture is a pretty good indication that the attitude has changed. Therefore, the New Mexico private equity program part of the SIC, which exists solely because of legislation on the books, in the statute, you have a statute that says that up to 11% of the severance tax fund can be, or may be, I wish it had said will, but it says may be invested in New Mexico venture capital. From a policy standpoint, the SIC has determined that 9% is the right figure to use to take account of the vagaries in the market. If the fund were to go down, but the private equity part were to be greater, then we could exceed the 11%. So that gives us some cushion. That's the hard part. But the good part is, in the last 8 weeks, because of oil and gas, 1.9 billion has gone into the bottom line of the severance tax fund. That is more money than went into the severance tax fund in the previous 20 years combined. And so oil and gas has had its great effect on this as well. I believe that the council will, right now our cap would have been before this, about 450 million, and now we're gonna move up to about 700 million, and I believe, again, this is me, only one of us, and I'm kind of a hawk about this, but only one of I believe that the council will be more willing to make more venture investments. Okay, so that's the SIC side. I'll be happy to answer questions later. Number two, Waneta related to the New Mexico Venture Capital Fund, which was created by House Bill 104 in the last legislature and signed by the governor. We put it in at 100 million. It eventually got knocked down to 35 million. But that's okay, because that's a pretty darn good thing too. That's going to be managed by the New Mexico Finance Authority. They are deeply in the process of putting together their program. I cannot speak for them, but I do know that the plans are very similar in that there will be a fund of funds and that there may be some direct investing. Again, this is their policy and their program. They are working closely with the SIC and with the other program I'll tell you about in just a second. And that money will be also one-to-one. So there's 70 million. So we've talked about the SIC having a couple of $100 million that's potential over time. We're talking about the America's Future Fund, which is somewhere between 10 and 20 initially. And I think that my prediction is that the NMFA will have their procedures in line within probably within 8 to 12 weeks. That's my guess. Sometime in the second quarter, hopefully. Could be a little longer, but it's more complicated because it's never been done before. But they put the money in their hands because they felt that would be a really good place to put it because of the fact that it could be basically drawn up and done from zero, starting from zero and put together. The last thing I'll talk about is the SSBCI money. And again, if you go on you can see a short blurb on the New Mexico Finance Authority website. You can see a lot bigger blurb on the New Mexico Economic Development Department website, but you got to dig. You go, I think it's you know what it is? I'm actually going to take a second and see if I can tell you where to go, because I know this is a big deal. Let me try to go, okay. You go to, you start out with the Economic Development Department, their main website. That's edd.newmexico.gov. Start there and then look over at a business resource directory. You go to resource directory, you can ultimately get to, oops, I told you it's hard. I'm not going to tell you this anymore because I'll sit here and blither for about 5 minutes. Go to the EDD website and look up SSBCI and you'll eventually get there. Part of Build Back Better, New Mexico got $74 million spread out over 3 years, which will be available for venture investing. There's also TJ, you can help me out here. There's a technical assistance. There's also a technical assistance amount of money that's in that group, which is a wee bit different. But the good news is that process is being put together by the New Mexico Economic Development Department, and they're going to. I want to step back 1 second. New Mexico, you need an advisor, and the advisor, Abibar, is that correct? Abibar Capital is the advisor for the New Mexico New Mexico Venture Cap. For the SSBCI. New Mexico, the Finance Authority is in the process of putting that together now. The advisor, it's already begun, and I believe that if you look at the website, a lot of the information is already there for companies seeking funds to apply and to become involved with that process. So SSBCI, that's 22 million the first year-ish, and that'll be 44 million. So all of a sudden you got 44, you got 20, you got 70. All of a sudden, those numbers kind of make the early numbers just pale. But I think that the opportunities now are the best I've ever seen, and certainly since I got here. And there's a lot of help. There's a lot. You can get a lot of help looking at this. But my suggestion is pay attention to those particular areas and apply. Be among the first to apply and get in line. And Again, that's not specific to bio or to anything of that nature, it's wide open, but bio is certainly part of it. And I think that David and Waneta, I hope, will be wonderful applicants, I believe, and hopefully we'll get a big old chunk of money to move on. This is going to allow us to make those second investments that David said we've been missing.
And that money is available for direct investments in the companies or available for investments in the funds and make investments in the companies.
In funds. Well, in other words, again, because in the past, every time that an entity please don't quote me on this. Anytime an entity in New Mexico has taken it upon themselves to make the direct investments,
No, I agree.
it's gone bye-bye. So I think
But that doubling that you're talking about is dependent on finding matching capital.
that's correct. That's correct.
I mean, that's still a challenge.
Oh, no question about it. You mentioned that earlier, about that challenge, how challenging that is. I'm sorry, Stu, for taking so much.
No, that's good. I think everyone found that interesting. What I'm hearing are a couple of things. One is there's going to be lots of money available. It's going to be hard to get, but that capital availability probably won't be a problem if you can find the matching funds. Okay. The second thing I'm hearing is this is all going to be invested through funds of funds, which means we're going to need more Cottonways, more Tramways, more Arrowhead Innovation Funds, TJ's fund. We're going to need more of those funds, not just those four. Is there any effort being put forth to do that, to trigger creation of new investing funds?
If I could just add one more thing. The really neat thing about both the SSBCI money and the NMFA money is that it says invest or cause to be invested. So that's at least a very positive step, because a fund, if a fund comes, for example, if Waneta were to, let's say Waneta put 500,000 into something with her fund and then caused another company to put 500,000 in, or another fund, then they could go for $1 million. In other words, it was one-to-one. So it's not just all that. So that's more freedom. Sorry, your question would.
Yeah. Well, so the follow-on question really is, okay, let's assume this money is going to be available from its various sources. How, if I'm a startup or even a early stage or later stage, how do I approach you? How do I make contact with you to find out if I can get some of this pot of money? Ryan, you want to start?
Well, with the Bioscience Authority, we're going to depend on our counterparts of bringing those investments to us. And so that's why it's so key that we are all working together. I was thinking about it with legislative strategy, as we're all here together and we all want the same thing, right? To grow the bioscience, biotech industry here in our state. And it's going to take everybody collectively. And so TJ was sharing with me just an amazing program that they're going to be up at the legislature trying to, sell and get monies for. And TJ, we're going to be right there with you, helping you guys get that, because it doesn't take away from what we're trying to do. And the same thing with Tramway and all of the different venture funds as we all work together. And so with our program, our key thing is this, is that, as Harold was saying, and I was there in an administration right after an administration was kind of guilty of trying to do this direct investment and the money went away. And so legislators were really key on, well, no, we're not going to give any more money for that because we've tried that. Well, I think because of what you guys have done and the Catalyst funds and what TJ has done, legislators are now saying, oh no, we can take public dollars. We can trust people to invest them into bioscience companies, biotech companies here in New Mexico, or whatever type of New Mexico-based company, and it's going to be a good investment. And there's going to be a return on investment. And so I think it's great, as you were saying, Stu, 5 years ago, how many people would be here? And now we have a room full. So we're an army that we can all work together to go do this. And the more that we do it, the more as we go up to the legislature, they're going to trust us.
Dave?
In terms of approaching Cottonwood, it's pretty easy. You just go to our website, it's cottonwood.vc. My contact information is there. I mean, I get emails every day with new ideas. So that's a large part of my job is looking for good ideas to invest in. So we're very happy to receive emails from anybody. I mean, sometimes we get them directly, sometimes we get them through referrals, people that we know that they know us or whatever, but I'm happy to be approached directly. It's pretty easy. So anybody has a great idea, feel free to send it to me. And I was going to take a little bit of my time though, Stu, to talk about the other side. Maybe this is going to be a question, but I'll go ahead and preemptively jump into this. I think make sure we address it, because part of the equation is capital, which we're talking about. How do we solve the capital problem? As big a problem ultimately is, where do you find the leadership for these companies? And I've been trying to work on legislative ideas around a lead-alike program. I know this is outside your sphere of influence. Well, nothing's outside your sphere of influence, so maybe it's good
I can get in trouble in any forum.
But with the idea that we could create almost like a lead-alike program or some tax incentives, I can tell you we've invested in 4 or 5 New Mexico-based biosciences related companies. 100% of the time when we've gone to upgrade the management team, we've gone outside the state. And not because we want to. If we didn't want to, if we could find the person we wanted here, believe me, we would hire the person here. But Exogen ended up in San Diego because of that. Our CEO for Harmonica's in San Diego. We're doing a recruit right now for another company. It's Biosciences Center. We got 2 lead candidates. Neither are from New Mexico. Respira, I actually did hire a New Mexico person who happened to retire here, but then he hired the whole team in California. So the company still ended up in California, even though he was here. And so I do think it's something that the state should think about, because, you know, we have LEADA program, which funds infrastructure. Infrastructure doesn't create jobs, people create jobs. And so you mentioned earlier, all these companies would get money early and then they would move to California to find capital. Okay, great. We don't have to maybe as often move to California to find capital. Now we end up moving to California to find management. And so the same result happens over time. And we lose the jobs that could be created in New Mexico because we don't have a way to keep those companies here because we don't have the management here. And yes, we can grow our own to some extent, but I think we have to think about, how do we attract these kind of people to this state? It's a great state to live in. We're all here. I'm here. And there's things that we can do to make that easier to bring these executives. And so when they think about taking a job at one of our companies, they think about moving their family here rather than moving the company where they are. And I think it's a really critical element of how do we create this ecosystem. It's not being addressed by anybody, not on the top of anybody's agenda. And so we're going to continue to lose jobs. We're going to continue to lose IP to other states who have the money and have the management. We can get these companies started, but it's a shame to get them started and then watch them leave. Let's keep them here.
Waneta?
Yeah, well, I certainly second all of that. And I think we have to do both. We have to grow our own, and that begins, you know, with our schools and all of that. But that's a long-term process. So this is a case of jump starting. And some of the ideas that David talked about are really, really critical. And I think our opportunity to attract people is better now post-pandemic. The idea that people are willing to think about living somewhere they haven't before. And it's not that we don't have talent. I mean, we are awash in technology talent in this state. I mean, like none other. You can look at an infographic on our website about these things most of you know already. But the opportunity to bring some people who've done it, been there, done that, and it's unusual. You see a Bill Gates once in a blue moon.
Well, that's how you grow your own. I mean, you grow your own indirectly by getting people who know what they're doing to move here, and then they train people, and they're going to hire people locally when they can as well. And so I think it's indirectly growing your own, even though it's a little bit indirect.
Right. We have one example. One of our portfolio companies is Wavefront Dynamics, Wavedyne, which has Dan Neal's the CEO. He's been in New Mexico forever. That company started as a Sandia spin out 20-some years ago, was bought by AMO, and Abbott bought the optical division of AMO, and then J&J Vision bought that, and ultimately spun them back out as a new startup. And so here's a whole team that's here. and not going anywhere. But that's just a prime example. And that was a 2-decade story, at least.
Well, I think that that's something that each of us in the room, anyone who has any influence at all over your legislator or your legislators, say something. In other words, I think the SIC has, as I indicated earlier, I genuinely believe the SIC has made a quantum leap. Again, this is me, a quantum leap in the idea of financially supporting venture. But we don't have the solution to what Waneta and David have talked about, which I happen to know based on a significant number of conversations is huge. And that is talent. We need to figure that part of it out. So we need to convince our legislators and we need to convince the leaders that we need methods. And there are methods. There are ways to do it, to grow, either bring in, import, or grow our own, but keep them here. The SIC is doing what it's doing because we're trying to grow our own financially. That doesn't necessarily cover it. And I mean, it's incredibly frustrating to me to see a company start here, have legs, look good,
Then move away.
bye-bye.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, that's really frustrating.
Well, one of the programs that we have at UNM, and my colleague, Dr. Prosnitz, is here, we have the Ascend program, and that is essentially what we're trying to do is to help entrepreneurs in that management skills and take them through and give them the support that they need. And I think the more types of programs, and I think TJ, that's what you're talking about with your new program, being able to provide is that entrepreneurial training and then into management training and help people where if they have falters, where we have people there that can step in and help them where they're lacking.
So we can see now that capital is here, it's coming, it's getting better. Dave has identified a missing component, and that is the CEO level talent. So in a startup, most startups are started by a scientist, a technical person. It's rare when you find the technical person who has the CEO skills, the national network to raise capital, to obtain other resources. And so that's when you need to bring in someone who's been there and done it before. We see that as an area that needs to address. A third area that I think we need to address is infrastructure. And what I mean by infrastructure is facilities. You know, I run the Bioscience Center. We've got 10 labs. They're full all the time. People fight over labs. When someone announces, like BioFlight recently, that they're moving because they need bigger space, that space is rented before they're gone, usually within 3 days of them saying they're leaving. And so, but there aren't enough labs in the state. Okay, so what's another component that's missing is bio or any kind of technology ready facilities, something that someone can move into, whether it be a new startup or one that's more advanced. You need a facility, and they're not here. So that's a third component that I haven't yet seen addressed in the state, but hopefully there will be. And if you're a real estate investor and you want to build labs, you'll get killed by the economics. You can't do it. There's no return on investment even under normal real estate standards. So you've got to have the state is going to have to step in and help with that infrastructure in some way. And so far, I don't think anyone's recognizing that as a weak spot as well. Closing comments now. Dave, you want to start?
I mean, I don't have a lot of additional information or comments. I think that, you know, the thing that's been surprising to me, as I mentioned, our focus is really both regionally and even Europe, and yet basically half of our investments have been based in Mexico. So we've made about 2 dozen investments in total since we started, about a dozen of those for a Mexico-based company. And so, to the earlier point, the ideas are clearly here. You know, some looking in Texas, some looking in Arizona, looking in Colorado, Utah, Germany, France, and yet half the investments are based here. So there's great ideas here. Starting to fill in, I think, some some of the other resources. You really need three things: the ideas, the money, and the management. And if you have two out of three, my history is finding third. So what I've always focused on is finding the ideas, putting in more money than normal. We put in like $2 million at the beginning, not 200,000, not 20,000. And the reason we do that is we need time to build something that we can demonstrate. If people just focus on hard text, and I can just go to the website over the weekend, see what happens. We got to actually get something that works, right? But the equal reason is we have to typically recruit a business person to the team, and you can't recruit somebody to a new company if you've got 20,000 or even 200,000 in the bank. You know, so 2 million is sort of the minimum that you need to be able to go out and add a key person to the team. If they already have a job, they have a family, they need some job security, they need to know they've got some time before the company needs to raise more money, so they have a chance to accomplish some of these objectives. And so that's why I'm so focused on this people part of the equation, because we have been light on capital historically. It's good news that some of that's starting to loosen up, and the state's thinking more proactively about how to be more supportive on the capital side. But again, that's only two of the three places. We have to figure out how to make the people side of the equation basically how do we, I think about it, if anybody gets hired, they tend not to want to max it up. Because they have a house and a family and they have a network. And when they think about moving to New Mexico, that's a big thing, right? Personally. But most people do what is best for them from a monetary standpoint. And so we can solve that if we can figure out, okay, what would be the tipping point that would make them willing to move to New Mexico? Whether it's some tax policy that allows them to reinvest the profits and not get taxed on the gains that they can create by running the company. We all know next door is Texas, which is a tax-free state. Tax policies, one thing we have to address. I was in North Carolina, our best entrepreneurs all moved to Florida. And so we're going to end up, we haven't had the problem yet because we haven't had any big success stories. Hopefully we have the problem. We get ahead of the problem by thinking about tax policy also, both to keep our best entrepreneurs here, but also to recruit folks who we have, like we're doing in Texas right now, right? We have the tools in our tool chest to say, hey, I know you want to stay in San Diego or wherever it might be, but would you consider moving to New Mexico? We could offer you X, Y, and Z, right? Right now, we have nothing to offer other than stock and a paycheck, which they can get no matter where they're living. We're not requiring New Mexico.
Yeah, but I think what gets their attention beyond that is the ideas that are unique here and the cost of doing business. So we have some things in our quiver here.
Let's open up to the floor for questions. Who wants to think?
They're fighting over it. Rock, paper, scissors.
First off, thank you very much for your talk today. It was very, very interesting. I moved here 5 years ago from Philadelphia, and I've been a serial entrepreneur since 1988. And it's been interesting to observe different things. One weakness here in the state that I consider major is there's not a law firm. We have Peacock, of course, but we don't have the equivalent, of Morgan Lewis, which has a whole practice area around startups that can, essentially do your legal work until you get to your A round or whatever. That's one thing. Secondly, in Philly in the 90s, was a constant discussion of the brain drain going on to New York, Boston, and Washington out of Philadelphia. It was on the front page of the newspapers. Everybody's talking about it. But it wasn't about the companies leaving. It was about the graduates from our universities. And it took a time, it took effort, it took years for the city, especially Philadelphia, suburbs too, to really focus on that. And they started tracking it. Started tracking the numbers of graduates that actually stayed for jobs in greater Philadelphia. And just measuring that changed the whole game, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other people. Because it used to be that if you graduated, and again, you have a major university there, University of Pennsylvania, right? It's an Ivy League school, one of the best business schools in America. And fewer than 15% of the students would still be there a year later after they graduated. They've turned that around. So my question to the group here is, does New Mexico track that? Like the UNM Business School or the technical colleges, when those graduates graduate, where do they go? Do they stay here? I bet most of them don't.
Yeah, I'll just comment. I don't know about the data. Maybe Ryan can answer that. But in terms of the competition for talent for startups in New Mexico, it's our national laboratories, which are on the one hand, a huge asset from a technology standpoint, but they hire the engineers and the scientists. I'm oversimplifying, I think, but that's an unusual aspect of New Mexico. It's both one of our great assets and it's a draw on engineering and science. We're three in our because of the job security. And so those graduates are trading job security and maybe not such an exciting.
Well, I have a comment about that. Business is more than just technical businesses.
Right, yeah.
And so what about the MBA majors and the hotshot business startup guys that were coming out of college? Where do they go? They go to Texas, I bet. Colorado, be my guess.
I don't know the data.
I can make a comment because not only do I have the Bioscience Center, but I have the Fat Pipe network of co-working places that are around the state. And what I'm seeing is a significant influx of people from other places. Many in the Bioscience Center, and it's often a trailing spouse. So recently, just one example, a woman in Boston, husband took a job in one of the space-related aerospace companies here. She's been a biotech chief scientific officer around the East Coast. She's coming here, and she's starting to network. Okay, and she's met with me and a bunch of others. And what I'm seeing is I'm probably getting a call once every week to 10 days now from someone in that kind of mode. Okay, so people are coming. They're not the kind of talent Dave is talking about. They tend not to be that CEO talent, although some of them might be. And they're people who are wanting to do startups because they've heard the infrastructure in New Mexico is really good now for early stage companies. And so we're starting to get some attention paid. Graduates from the universities here, most of them leave the state because they say they can't find jobs, but the companies here said they can't find people. There's a disconnect there, and I haven't figured out how to address that particular problem, but there's definitely a disconnect.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, it's an evolutionary thing. It's not going to be solved overnight, but it has to start from, again, I'm repeating myself probably, but it has to start from the top down. You don't have jobs for graduates if you don't have companies growing here, right? And so, the way companies are going to grow here and stay here is to be able to solve the equation in the executive suite, right? Because even if you get a job here, then the company moves to San Diego or East Coast, those jobs disappear, right? So I think it's an evolutionary thing. I think it gets solved over time. It gets solved by having capital to get companies started here, but then ultimately to keep them here, we have to have the executive suite talent as well. And part of that gets trained, but part of it I think has to be imported.
What's happening in Northern California, we probably should start advertising there about the weather in New Mexico. See if we can draw some of those people in.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to ask, is it unreasonable to ask those companies locally that are born and bred here, like our company, Allerpops is, and we want to stay here? Is it unreasonable to have access to some of these funds, but there is a term involved, which could be, if you get access to this money, you stay here for 10 years or 5 years. Is this enforceable? Does this
Not
discourage?
even advisable,
No?
quite honestly.
Yeah.
Anytime a state tries to dictate how a company is going to be successful, it fails.
Okay.
Companies have to do what they have to do to be successful.
Yeah.
The best thing the state can do is create the ecosystem and the resources so the companies want to stay here and they can grow here. But putting strings is counterproductive.
It is,
always.
okay.
Got to
yeah,
use the Tom Sawyer method. We got to make everybody want to paint the town.
Yeah.
And there's a certain
Yeah.
age group in here that probably recognizes that story.
You know, if I may, I was talking to Stu and a strategy is we need to find three companies, it's trifecta of local companies that are growing here that we can put on the, not only the national stage, but the international stage and say, these companies grew and they're from New Mexico, to draw attention that, yeah, this is a significant place because we have Los Alamos Labs, we have Sandia Lab, we're an intellectual state, we have incredible talent here, but those aren't startups that started by entrepreneurs. That was more government funded. But what we need to do is encourage the entrepreneurs that have started these companies. I think the trifecta is the way to go. We cite three companies, we put them on the national stage. This is money I think is worth investing in. Now, these three companies have to be vetted, they have to show their performance, but we're ready to go. Allerpops is there. We'd like to be part of that three-legged trifecta. And so we find two more, and I think we can start bringing more attention in drawing top talent from the rest of internationally to come here, stay here. I mean, we have I'm from California, I'm from San Diego. So I saw that infrastructure grow because of Qualcomm, Dr. Irwin Jacobs, who came there. Then all of a sudden, the whole demographic changed, which is now considered Silicon South. San Diego is because of that company. Then you had other entrepreneurs coming in, and then you had spinoffs from Qualcomm that stayed in San Diego. So if you have three companies, I think one of them probably, your odds are greater that one of them will be established. Let's say like a Qualcomm. I mean, that's being optimistic, but this is the way I see what I kind of gathered here today, the information. We need to capitalize on the trifecta effect. Yeah.
Well, I think there are some really exciting companies here in New Mexico. I mentioned we've invested in a number of New Mexico companies. So has Waneta. Harold's very familiar with the portfolio of companies that have been supported. So I do agree with you. I think as we see these companies be successful and become known more nationally, we get a positive sort of effect for New Mexico itself as a place where companies can start and can grow and can be successful. And promoting that, the companies.
Remember those programs?
Personally, for the state having a bit of a brand around innovation and the resources that are here. We have a great legacy, obviously, with the Manhattan Project and the national labs, the center of innovation in the country. But we haven't historically put the rest of the ingredients around the potential of a lot of these ideas to stay here and grow here. As that starts to occur, it's self-fulfilling.
Seeing that growth there. I'm 16 years old, so to have an environment like New Mexico where you don't have 30 million people, you have fresh air, incredible resources, beautiful mountains. I mean, who would want, if they knew, because I didn't even know about New Mexico. I was living in yeah, we have more offers, more than just business and lifestyle. So people generally are not going to move for really nice place unless they, have that fresh.
Well, again, it's when I was in North Carolina, we recruited a lot of people to move. We had the same problem. We recruited people, they moved to North Carolina, which people here probably think is a great place. But at the time, education wasn't that great, similar to here. Job opportunities weren't that great, similar to here. Over time, a lot of those people, once they were there, they're like, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to live here. Same thing will happen here, right? You got to get them here the first time.
One final question, Sue.
I think kind of more of a comment than a question. And unless we can get all the right people to the table, the people that are going to be interested in building that infrastructure that we so are in dire need of, and that's going to cause for a lot of economic development. But to your point, David, we need to just rebrand ourselves here. We do have a lot to offer and we do have reasons to stay. I was 30 years in San Diego, so I do know the difference. And I'm staying. So I think that we just have to bring all these right people to the table, the ones that can build the infrastructure, the universities, like CNM has an excellent program now to meet with the businesses and understand, okay, what do you need and how can we build a curriculum around that? So I think we have all the really good effort happening right now. Can I just ask one? Several of you mentioned this fund that TJ is working on. Can he speak to that for a moment? Would that be, is that okay?
So we're one of what Dave is calling that second fund people. So we are developing a second fund, Ingenuity Venture Fund 2. The thing that Ryan referenced a couple times is called a venture studio, and that's where you kind of package. You get a crack team of maybe 10, 12. There's some venture studios out there that are 30, 40 people. They have analysts. They look like a mega VC fund, but instead of a bunch of analysts, it's a bunch of operators who build businesses in parallel. You have everything you need to build a business of the type you're trying to build, whether it be B2B software or in this case, a life science company. I think that could be very promising for the bioscience community to look at, to say, we need managers who will come here. Well, let's build a venture studio with 4 awesome operators who want to be a part of a brand that magnetizes, create a team around them, and not be the CEO of any one company at any time, but a company, several companies in parallel. And in fact, I think the life sciences domain is the closest thing in that, maybe not in name, but in the activity we see in New Mexico, is closest to actually being a venture studio type of place. There is no other place except the Bioscience Center where there's this natural magnetism and people getting to know people, second degrees and third degree becoming first degree connections in a matter of a week, thanks in large part to Stu, but that whole culture. So I think a venture studio takes that to its next logical step. There's a fund around it. You pass through stage gates. So you have 5 ideas. 2 of them make it through the next stage gate. 3 of them get killed. They get $125,000 from the fund. Boom, it's planted. It's in your bank account. You know, to bring it all together like that, that was what's going through my mind, what Ryan was referencing. Yeah, incubator. If an incubator is here, you just get people together in a room and you let them stew and stuff. That's incubator. Accelerator puts a time pressure to it, and out pops the diamonds. A studio kind of goes across the whole spectrum, all the way through seed round. Said we're gonna need leave nothing of that to chance. We're gonna go from the friends and family kind of stage all the way to seed round, and we're gonna take a significant ownership portion because of that. So happy to have this conversation. I'm not trying to build a life sciences venture studio because I'm not a life sciences person, but I do think a venture studio model is what I keep hearing talked about as a natural evolution of what's been going on, and also something that could magnetize a lot of capital too. That's what he was talking about.
I just thought of something that has not come up today, but as we talk about drawing capital in from outside and getting attention to New Mexico, I think the whole business of the angel investment tax credit, which is a great program within the state, and making that refundable, which means it would be, I know it's been at the legislature a couple of years, but there are big angel groups that our companies talk about. Well, they're not talking about the they're talking about angel groups that will invest up to $1 million in a company. And I think attracting the ones in California and Florida with that angel investment tax credit, I know it's a little bit controversial, but I think the data shows that it pays off. And so that was just one little thing.
It's also complicated because the tax credit extends to New Mexico taxes. In other words, so you've got to have New Mexico taxes to pay before the credit can mean anything. And that's kind of where the challenge is. This is how I've heard the problems.
But if you make it refundable, then you don't have to have the tax.
Yeah.
You don't have to have the New Mexico tax.
Is that why you were controversial in that scenario?
Yeah, because basically somebody who cares about, has a kind of internally focused view of New Mexico taxpayers, they're basically subsidizing people who don't pay taxes in New Mexico. But what you're doing is recruiting a ton of investment in that will, it's not only money, but it's people that are highly networked. And I think it begins to address the problem of recruiting talent that's experienced. A lot of these angel investors are people who have been successful entrepreneurs and have exits. So I tend not to talk about political things, so I'm going to be quiet now. But it is on the, I hope it's on the agenda in this session again.
Are you ready for the next one, Greg? Okay.